It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by AgileDad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I recently came across an article that talks about are we ditching a definition of ready? Now, it's a matter of love it or hate it, or is there an alternative? What I can tell you is this. In the beginning, when Ken Schwaber first taught me about Scrum, there was no such thing really as a definition of ready. And it concerns me when people talk about definition of ready, because I almost think definition of ready should mean or equal definition of common sense, right? So I wanted to have this discussion and see if we couldn't come to terms with what a definition of ready is. And we're going to do it by reviewing this article. Now, I'll put a link to the article down below. I believe the author was Maria Check, I want to say her name is. I'm trying to remember. I apologize, Maria, if it's not perfect. But I want to go ahead and drop a link to that article down below. It starts off by talking about the story of two teams. They have one team called Carpe Diem, and they have a loose approach to refinement and sprint planning. Sometimes they would have them, sometimes they wouldn't. Oftentimes they would take a quick look at the stories during planning and they would add them to the sprint anyway. You only live once, right? And as a result, they would often have back and forth with the product owner, the designer, some other stakeholders. Just check JIRA tickets to see the number of comments. Because, of course, who would make a call to clarify any missing pieces? Who would add another meeting to their schedules? That's a no-go. Let's keep this endless comments and hours spent waiting for a reply loop going. All in all, there's a lot of unfinished stories each sprint, tons of spillover and rework, some blaming games and unhappy people. Let's pause there for a second. Unfortunately, this reality that's being discussed here is a truth. I have seen so many organizations say, Agile says we spend way too much time in meetings, so we're going to spend less time in meetings, and we can just talk about what we need to in the comments in Jira, or do whatever we need to do. And it ends up taking them to a place where refinement is non-existent. The conversations don't happen prior to the work entering a sprint, and you end up in this endless loop. It's a nightmare. There's unfinished work. The team never finishes what they commit to, and the team doesn't even understand commitment. It's horrible. It's a bad place to be. And I certainly don't encourage it. Okay, now let's take a look at Team Planner. This team is careful about all the stories they add to their sprint. After a few failed sprints, they decided to write a checklist to remind themselves of what a common story should consist of in order for it to be allowed to enter a sprint. This is what they called their definition of ready. They use it as guidance while refining the stories. As a result of an increased understanding of the common pitfalls, they improved the refinement process to avoid last-minute additions and frustrations. What's more, to prevent the disaster to reappear, they scheduled refinement and planning as a reoccurring weekly event. This improved process is not entirely thanks to the definition of ready, but it was a step that helped them to stop and rethink the way that they prepared their stories. Okay, let's stop for a second. So for me, I like that they called this definition of ready, and I guess if we want to get grammatically correct and making sure we're using the correct words, then yeah, I guess from a definition, from a defining moment perspective, that definition of ready is making sure something is ready to enter into a sprint. But at the same time, I think it's more than that. I think definition of ready is a shortcut version to the intake process that you've waited too long to do. There, I said it. I think that you suffer from cost of delaying to decide whether something's ready until right before it's going to enter a sprint, as opposed to having better backlog preparation prior to. So I almost think this is a way to explain bad behavior, not necessarily justify it, but try to find a way to correct bad behavior that shouldn't exist anyway, which is rather interesting. So the controversy is, do you have a definition already or not? And that's such a polarizing topic that many people just don't get around to talking about it. So here's the quote that I love from the story. It says, many Agile practitioners, from serious to the beginner, advise against having a definition of ready at all. Only a few of them, the ones that are more moderate, agree that it can be a helpful practice. So here's where I'm going with this. Checklist, all for it. Kata cards, all for it. Having some type of established system of record for quality management, 100 times all for it. Absolutely. Does it need to be heavyweight? Absolutely not. We just want to make sure that mistakes are not repeatable. I don't necessarily call this a definition of ready more than I call it. I think it's more of eliminating the hidden factory, which has been a tenet of lean forever. So I'm not leaning in, no pun intended, on definition of ready solving all the problems. In fact, I think definition of ready is a symptom. Ooh, I went there. It's a symptom that you didn't do something prior to make sure, that by the time it got to the sprint, you're going through a final checklist to make sure it's sprint ready, which I get, but I think that it's a symptom of you not doing something else. If you have a need for a definition of ready, it's a symptom of you not doing something prior to. So, where do I stand? After years of doing this, I can tell you right now that I've seen everything from no definition of ready to an extensive definition of ready to the most heartfelt checklist to a ridiculous amount of cumbersome back and forth volleyball. What I'm trying to say is, I think that we need to focus more on the ideation and focus more on the discovery behind backlog items before they even enter the queue. So that way, by the time they do get into a prep for sprint planning, a lightweight 1 hour backlog refinement between a team and a product owner can resolve most of these issues. I hate to see that at the final leg of the race, somebody has to go in and do an extensive checklist to decide whether it checks all the boxes as a system of weeding out what we're not going to work on, right? I mean, by the time it reaches just before sprint, that usually is a time where we say, okay, this is something that we really, really, really need to address. So I think that the key here is twofold. So let's get into both. So let's call this definition of ready 101, right? And this is a section that they call out in their article. And I'm kind of deviating here because I don't know that I agree with the rest of what's written here. So here we go. So for me, there are two things to consider. The first thing to consider with regard to is something ready to go into a sprint is, have we done proper ideation where we've vetted out to make sure what we're doing is a good idea? Have we done proper discovery where we've identified the targeted personas, did some mapping, some useful mapping and context mapping to understand how the system is going to be used by an end user, a persona? Have we gauged what techniques or what things need to be put in place, what features need to be built versus what we already have that could be repurposed? Have we tried to go a little deeper into what is causing this system to behave this way, and why do we need this extensive definition of ready at the end? Because I think if we do a little more upfront work with our product owners, stakeholders, business analysts, functional analysts, technical analysts, maybe a key representative from support, or someone who is a technical architect, we need to have just a few key players in a room to vet out work before it ever gets to the point that it reaches a release planning stage. And then once it's planned in a release planning stage, we need to have enough level of detail that we could t-shirt size the items. And then just prior to the sprint, we should have some refinement scheduled, a backlog grooming refinement session with the team and a product owner, just to validate that we are good to go. And it should be lightweight. It doesn't have to be anything heavyweight. So I think the keys here are, one, make sure you schedule a meeting with all the right parties. Make sure you have the right people involved. Don't overstuff or overcrowd the meeting, but make sure you have the right people involved. Two, use a lightweight tool like a Miro board, just to kind of make sure that you understand all the key tenets or ideas, and let people ask questions or throw out ideas there prior to the refinement meeting, so you have a more organized meeting around questions or themes that go with those items. Three, don't be afraid to get input from other people. Throw around some ideas. It's okay for us to be innovative or creative. It's okay for us to throw some things out there, because knowledge is power, and that's what we're going to use later to make sure we understand things. Four is find some kind of way to organize the ideas, vet them out, get them all together, figure out what we can do. and organize them both topically and by feature grouping so that we know what is going on. And make sure we understand that every item that enters a sprint should have a clear outcome. We should have some testing strategy about how we're going to test it. We should have some level of design complete if design is necessary. We need to make sure we manage or govern dependencies with other teams. We need to make sure that it's estimated or t-shirt sized correctly, and make sure that we understand, hey, that just because we don't have incredible detail, that we have enough detail to really understand the size of the scope, the quantity or volume, that it's small enough to fit into a single sprint and it's been broken down appropriately. And I think if you do these things, it's really going to help you just have the clarity that you need to get the work done during a sprint. And I think the whole purpose behind definition of ready, and I want to be clear here, is that definition of ready was originally designed as a band-aid to solve a different problem. So the problem that it was trying to resolve is that work is being carried over from one sprint to another. So if we had a better definition of ready, work wouldn't carry over. When in actuality, while that's a small part of the problem, the bigger part of the problem is, great, now we have this definition of ready. Is it useful, and is it helping me do something better? And I think that's the key, because too often we put so much credence or weight on a definition of ready that we're not solving the actual problem, which is, are we communicating effectively? Are we looking for the right information to make sure a backlog item is properly prepared way before it goes into release planning or backlog refinement? And are we keeping our backlog refinement meetings lightweight with a single team and product owner, just to make sure we don't need any further clarification before an item enters into the sprint? The refinement meeting or grooming meeting should never be used to go through a huge checklist to make sure something meets all the requirements to enter a sprint. And that's where I feel like the definition of ready is dead. That's going to do it for today. If you have a topic you want us to cover, learn more at AgileDad.com. We would love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.